What's up, everybody? Welcome to Talking Again podcast. I am your host, Fidel. This is The Tap. Thank you for tuning in, and please make sure and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to click on the notification bell. You can also find the show on all your popular podcast platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen. Let's get this show started. Nathan Gauer is
That's
my
right.
guest today at Talking Again podcast, The Tap Studios.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, first of all.
Absolutely.
Thanks to Laura
That's right.
for sending out the
Mutual
line.
connection.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
This happened real quick, to be honest with you. I mean, I know she mentioned to me about you months ago.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
Yeah, but it just never came to fruition as far as setting up that appointment. But this
Time
happened
and a
quick.
place.
Yeah, this happened quick, and we're here. I didn't get to do too much research. I mean, I really wanted to read your first your memoir, your first book. I wanted to get some more information, but I did read the prologue. So I think, that got me to kind of know more or less where you came from, where you come from, which is D.C.
That's right.
Washington,
Born in
DC.
D.C.,
Yeah.
raised in Virginia. I've moved a lot. I've moved almost 35 times in my life.
Wow.
Grew up on the East Coast, but I've been on the West Coast for a while now.
Yeah. But you've been also all over the world, not just
Yeah.
the country.
So I lived in Istanbul for almost a year. That was back in 2012. And then South America for 5 years.
Okay.
Argentina and Paraguay. Mainly Paraguay
Yeah.
between those two. That's where my wife is from, actually.
Paraguay, yeah.
Sí.
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 Muy bien. How's your español?
O sea, no es perfecto, pero, o sea,
Ahí andas.
sí, yo puedo comunicar,
There you
digamos,
go.
sí.
Yeah.
My writing is terrible, though. Street Spanish,
Yeah.
that's all I know.
You know, I left. I stopped. No, I shouldn't say I stopped speaking Spanish, but it definitely took a back seat as far as languages when I moved here to West Covina from El Monte.
Okay.
Yeah, I was 5 years old and I just English the whole way.
Yeah.
And
Well, public school will do that to you too, right?
especially
Depending on where you go.
If you don't go to those ESLs,
Right.
which those are a crutch and they don't allow you to
Right.
progress. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the way I learned was reading my mom's like little Bible, reading her Bible in Spanish, and then trying to write. That's how I learned how to read. How to not read, but how to pick it back up.
Wow.
A little bit more fluently.
Yeah.
That and then living with hanging out with my now wife, back then girlfriend. I had to speak Spanish. In the
I
house.
learned it through. I was living in South America, obviously, but the first 3 or 4 months, my wife had to translate for me.
Yeah.
I had lived in Argentina back in 2003 in Buenos Aires, and their accent is very different.
Yeah.
Everything is mayonnaise, che, baludo,
Yeah.
all that. It's almost Italian, the
Yeah.
way that it sounds. And so when I got to Paraguay, the accent couldn't be more different. I could not understand what anybody was saying because they have two official languages there, Guarani and Spanish. And sidebar, I think in the future we will definitely have two official languages in America. And I shouldn't say America, United States of America, because
we already do English and Spanish.
official, right?
Yeah, right.
Subway.
Exactly. Good plug.
So, so Guarani, really, the way that they speak Guarani, which is an old indigenous language, it really shapes how they speak Spanish.
Yeah.
So if you don't know Guarani, and not just the way that they speak Spanish, but half of the words they use are Guarani. So I was just sitting around like, what are they saying? I don't know. And my wife would be translating.
Yeah.
And so I would go home frustrated because, we're there. I have to figure out how am I going to make a living? How am I going to survive here? How am I going to make friends?
Right.
And so what I did was I started watching YouTube videos of Eduardo Galeano, who's one of my favorite writers of all time. He's Uruguayan originally. He went into exile. He moved to, I think, Barcelona. Well, first to Argentina in the late 70s because he was a journalist, and at that time, it was very dangerous to practice journalism in many Latin American countries.
Yeah.
Many of his colleagues disappeared, were shot to death, were imprisoned, went into exile. So he fled his country for his anti-dictatorship views. He started a literary magazine in Argentina, and then he had to flee Argentina because they were starting to kill journalists there as well during the whole desaparecidos, that whole I think 30,000 people disappeared and were never accounted for. Students, artists, poets, professors, journalists, anybody who the government deemed dangerous.
Was that during the whole Pablo Escobar time or era?
Escobar, I would say Escobar came later. He was more the 80s, right?
Okay, yeah.
Like think
Yeah.
like Wolf of Wall Street
Yeah.
and that whole era of excess. Pablo Escobar represented the extreme of that, right? Like
Yeah.
I think I'm sure he was alive in the 70s and he was being formed at that time, but I think his kind of reign was in the 80s.
Yeah.
So yeah, anybody out there who's interested in Latin American history, it's a really difficult time, the 70s, and a lot to learn from in terms of our own government's involvement with supporting those dictatorships in the name of freedom and democracy.
Right.
Right.
Of course.
So Eduardo then, in I think 84, they restored democracy to Uruguay. Eduardo returned, and he went on to become one of the most celebrated writers in Latin American history.
Yeah.
Beyond just his writing, though, I think I really appreciate his humanity. He never had this air of, I'm a wise man who's going to tell you the way the world should be. He's very humble, very funny, very down to earth, and he always stood on the side of people who were facing injustice. He had tremendous anger towards injustice in the world. So anyways, I would, watch his YouTube videos and, work through my own frustration with not being able to say shit in Spanish. And after a few months, it just clicked and I started, learning how to speak. Mm-hmm. And it's a muscle I don't want to forget how to use.
Right. You have to practice it.
You have to practice
it very often.
As much as possible.
And LA is a good place to
It's a good
practice.
place. It's a good place. And having a wife whose first language is Spanish helps for sure, which is the case with my wife.
What was your major or the reason why you moved out to LA?
To Los Angeles?
To Los Angeles.
So originally I moved to LA first with my parents in 91 for my dad's job. We were only here for 2 years. We came just in time for the LA riots.
Perfect.
Crash course in Los Angeles culture and history. His job then sent us back to Virginia. And then I came back to the West Coast for college, 2001. That was actually in Orange County at Soka University of America.
Right.
Which is an incredible school.
Yeah. Which, by the way, you're the first class.
Very first class.
That's crazy.
Which was an amazing. Yeah, I mean.
How does that feel to be know you're the? I mean, this class this university has been around in almost 20 years.
Yeah, and now it's ranked like in the top. I think the latest rankings, it's in the top 30 liberal arts colleges in America. Yeah. And when we started, we weren't even sure if like the school would still be open in 4 years. You know what I mean? No, senior students to ask their advice about what to do. We had to create all of the clubs and the culture and student government, everything we had to build from the ground up. That in and of itself was an education. Of course. Learning like what does it mean to really create a community together. Yeah. And what's unique about it is it's students from all over the world. One of the main goals of the school is to foster global citizens, people who are rooted in their national culture and are proud of where they come from, but who are not blindly attached to that and can see the importance of working as the planet, like transcending national differences. Yeah. And what was, I think to me, like what best represents our experience was 2 weeks after the school opened, this experiment in global citizenship, 9/11 happened. Ooh, 2 weeks later, right, and we're like looking in the huge TV screen in the cafeteria as the planes hit the Twin Towers. Yeah. My roommate actually was the only student from the Middle East in the first class. He's Turkish. Yeah. And I remember that night, like when I came back to our dorm room, he was crying. He had tears in his eyes. And he said, "This is not what the Middle East stands for. This is not what Islam stands for." Yeah. And he was just apologizing. And I told him, you don't have to apologize. Like, you didn't do anything, right? Just because you're from there. Like, and unfortunately, like, we swung it in the opposite direction for a year where we were demonizing Islam. I mean, we're still, to a certain extent, our country, people in our country, not everybody, still demonizes Islam and Muslims. But that friendship with my roommate, his name is Sanan, through that experience of being roommates, becoming like brothers, and just what 9/11 did to our country, to our national psyche, we decided our lifelong dream is to build Soka University of Turkey in Istanbul as a bridge between North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, having students come from all over to figure out how can we transcend these differences in history, culture, religion, economics, and work together. So that's actually why I moved to Istanbul in 2012, was to take the first step to make connections, to find allies, to find people who might be interested in a project like that.
And how's that progress going?
I would say I was successful in that there's about 10 people who now share that dream. We identified the site where we want to build the university. Now we just have to raise $500 million.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's not too bad.
I mean, I think I've saved up like $230 towards it. So we're making progress.
There you go.
No, but in all seriousness, like having something to look forward to, because my goal is that we can accomplish that before I die, before Sanan and I die. So we both plan to live long lives. So it's not something that we're rushing towards. I mean, realistically speaking, the political climate in Turkey right now, it would be impossible to open a university like that.
Right.
And I don't want to go into too much about why that is, but certain things would have to change for that to even be in the realm of possibility. But I think it's so important in life to have larger dreams that we're working towards that are almost impossible, because then when we face walls in our daily life, like we have something that reminds us, but I'm building towards something. So all the other things that I'm trying to accomplish now, it's all geared towards one day in the future being able to have the type of resources to do something like that. Yeah.
It's that journey. It's that journey that you're learning along the way to get you to where you want. And that's
for sure.
Yeah.
And it's hard to remember that sometimes.
It is.
When life's kicking the shit out of you, you know what I mean?
When you keep running into that wall.
Right. Sometimes it's the same wall again and again. And ask yourself, why do I keep encountering the same thing?
Right. Yeah.
But, if you see it as like part of your training to become stronger, to become wiser, and to become better at, navigating, those pitfalls in the future, then at least you can find meaning in the midst of it.
Yeah.
That's the worst, is when you feel like there's no meaning to your struggle.
Right.
That I think someone told me that was how in Chinese prison camps, that was one of the worst forms of torture. They would make people dig a hole all day long. And at the end of the day, they would say, okay, fill it back up. So hard labor in the sun with no purpose.
Yeah.
They weren't building anything.
Yeah. They weren't trying to get to anywhere. They
were doing nothing. So, and I think sometimes when we're struggling, if we feel like this is meaningless, that makes it 100 times worse.
Yeah.
So I guess that's one of the key challenges, right? Is like, how do we find meaning in the midst of our struggles?
Right. And you talked about your training in life. How do you get your training? Where is it that you get your training from?
That's a great question. Without question, my training is rooted in my practice of Buddhism. I was born into a Buddhist family. And, it was always funny growing up. Like, I remember trying to think of examples. Like, in school, kids would always tease me, make fun of me. Oh, well, not beyond just teasing me. A lot of them would say, you're going to hell. Like, when I'm 5, 6 years old, you're going to burn in hell for eternity. And I've always been stubborn. So that would make me even more, like, determined to tell people that I'm Buddhist. Like, I used to refuse to do the Pledge of Allegiance in first grade because it says, and no offense to anybody that believes in God, but it says one nation under God.
Yeah.
And I wasn't raised to believe in a Christian notion of God. Of course, I believe in the divinity of all life and in the, divinity of the universe, that the power of the universe exists within all life and all existence. It's not that I'm anti-religious, but because I was being told every day you're going to go to hell unless you accept our way of thinking, that was my form of,
rebellion.
First grade rebellion is kiss my ass. I'm not going to do the Pledge of Allegiance.
You're right.
That being said, I think a lot of my friends, a lot of people in general in America, their perception of Buddhism is that it's a bunch of monks wearing orange robes with shaved heads who retreat to the mountaintop. There are forms of Buddhism that's exactly what it is. It's
Yeah.
monks who shave their heads and retreat from society.
Mhm.
There's two major schools of Buddhism, Theravada and Mahayana. Theravada tends to be more secluded, isolated, esoteric, retreating from society. Mahayana in general is really about engaging with society. That truth and enlightenment is found in the midst of the struggle of daily life. You can't retreat from life and think you're going to become enlightened. It's only by facing your problems, challenging daily life, engaging with life, and engaging with people that you can develop wisdom.
Yeah.
And so even more specifically, I practice with the Soka International. It was founded in 1930 based on the teachings of a reformist Buddhist scholar and philosopher and monk from the 13th century named Nichiren Daishonin. So he was like the whole story of Martin Luther and the Reformation with
Right.
the church.
Yeah.
He's the Martin Luther of Buddhism, because in Japanese society, feudal society at that time, basically Buddhism was something that people became monks basically to get an education and to make money and to become more powerful. Like, it was completely divorced from daily people's lives.
Yeah.
And people were told, if you want to attain enlightenment, make donations to the priests. Like, so religion there was this intermediary. You have to go through the temple. You have to go through these priests in order to practice Buddhism.
Right.
So it wasn't religion for the people. It was religion for the priestly caste. So Nichiren Daishonin, at a very young age, he was disgusted by that. And he thought the whole purpose of the founding of Buddhism was to help people become happy,
Yeah.
to challenge their sufferings. This is doing the exact opposite. It's like, what was it Karl Marx said? The opiate of the masses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he just threw his whole life into studying every Buddhist teaching ever documented. And his conclusion after many years of study and struggle was that he was able to create a concrete practice of chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo means, Nam means devotion.
Mm-hmm.
Myoho means mystic law or cause and effect. Renge means, Myoho means mystic law. Renge means cause and effect or lotus blossom. I'm going to explain how this all ties together.
Yeah.
Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Kyo is basically sound or teaching. So what that means is I devote myself to the mystic law. The mystic law is like, for example, if I take this, if I drop it, that happened. We take that for granted. Oh, so what? You dropped the thing of Altoids. But
Right.
There's a law of gravity at work that we can't see. Or if you turn on your television, the way that TVs work or even radio, like we're doing a podcast right now, invisible radio waves can be transmitted and harnessed to have sound travel around the entire world.
Right.
And we take that for granted because we just turn on a button and it works, but there's these profound laws of science that are at work behind that. So the mystic law in the context of Buddhism is the law of life and death that underlies all existence in the universe. It's what ties the entire universe, harmonizes all from the planets and the stars to the individual's functions in their body. It's the law of life and death. So we're devoting ourselves to this law through sound, by chanting. So in this principle of cause and effect, the lotus blossom is the only flower in the world that it both seeds and flowers at the same time. Mm-hmm. So what that symbolizes is in Buddhism, we believe that cause and effect is simultaneous. So when you think, when you speak, and when you act, you're making a cause. We make causes every moment of every day through our thoughts, through our words, through our actions. And, a lot of times people think, well, I make a cause now and the effect, is maybe it'll come much, much later. That's true. You may not see the effect till later, but it's this idea that your cause is registered instantaneously in your karma, your karmic storehouse. Mm-hmm. So you're creating kind of like a storehouse of all causes that you make from moment to moment. And so the sum total of your existence is the causes that you make. The way that the way a person's mindset is visible in their face.
Yeah.
Right? You can see the same person who's consumed by depression or suffering, and you see that mindset completely visible in their face. Or if they're happy, they look completely different. Or if you see people who like maybe used to be, moving down a criminal path when they were younger, their whole face, their whole existence looks different because of the nature of how they think, how they speak, how they act. And so so I'm not trying to be too, esoteric, philosophical. What does this actually mean for ordinary people? It means that by chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, we can manifest this limitless wisdom and power and energy from within our own life.
Yeah.
That the Buddha is life itself. The Buddha is not some supernatural being that we should be worshiping or venerating. Oh, Buddha, please save me.
Right.
Buddha exists inside of you. You are the Buddha. It's just a matter of awakening that Buddha potential within your own life. And it's not something that we don't subscribe to blind belief at all. It's very scientific. Try it out. Try chanting. Chant for things you want to see happen or change. If it works, keep chanting. Keep trying new things. Do experiments. If it doesn't work, don't waste your time.
Yeah.
So that's in a nutshell. Like that, you asked me, what my training is. Definitely Buddhism, practicing Buddhism, and then also learning from my mentor in life, Daisaku Ikeda.
Mm-hmm.
He's the current president of the Soka Gakkai, the Buddhist organization I belong to. I'll be honest, man, like when I was that's what you mentioned the book earlier. A lot of the book is about my miseducation as a youth, how I didn't understand the purpose of going to school, and I was expelled from public school in 8th grade, was really lost for a while,
Yeah.
And
Was it because you didn't want to say the Pledge of Allegiance?
It probably all started with that. That was the beginning of my downfall, for sure. No, I mean, I think I had a lot of, moving a lot played into it. My parents got divorced. I didn't understand why that was. I was angry. And then just the type of friends that I was surrounding myself with, we would smoke weed 10 times a day, drink hard liquor at, 10 o'clock in the morning. This is like at the age of 13. Wow. So if you're 13 and you're already drunk and high all day long every day, like you're already not going to make good decisions even when you're sober when you're 13.
Right. Yep.
So you add that in and you start doing dumb shit, you know? And I was always a follower because I moved so much. I was always like trying to fit in because I was always a new kid. So I didn't have a lot of confidence. I was a follower. And so I was following the wrong people and just doing things I knew were wrong just to impress people, to become a part of their crew. Exactly. So I got expelled. And by junior year, I had a 1.1 GPA. My guidance counselor said, don't even bother taking the SATs. Not everybody's meant to go to college. And I listened to her. I didn't take the SATs. I was like, I took my mom out to lunch summer before senior year and told her I'm going to drop out. Like there's no way I can finish high school. I can't do this anymore. She was so disappointed, man. Like she was really disappointed, but she knew like I had to figure out for myself what I was going to do, whether it was get my GED or whatever. And then everything changed like a month later, like within the course of just a few months, like 4 or 5 of my friends died. I got arrested, DUI, was facing a year in jail. My mom got really sick. She has a lot of autoimmune diseases. Things just started falling apart. Yeah. And when I got arrested, I got my car impounded that night. I had gone into the city to buy drugs and got arrested on the way home. And they said, you can either spend the night in jail or walk home. And I was like, I think 11 miles from home. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, but it was like 95 degrees. It was a hot, DC summer. And so I said, I'm going to walk home. And so I had a lot of time to think on the way home. And I thought my dad was going to kick me out of the house because it just had been one thing after another, you know. And they were divorced at that time, but he invited her over and we had dinner and they said, we just want you to become happy. We know you're miserable. You're not happy. You can become happy if you take responsibility for your own life and try practicing Buddhism, the philosophy you were born into. And it was just something about how sincere they were. And I could really feel that that's really all that they cared about, was me overcoming the shit that was just controlling my life, that was making me make so many poor decisions. And it was myself. And so I started chanting that night. And man, within a few months, like, my whole mindset shifted about everything. And I realized I was blaming everything and everybody outside of myself for my own unhappiness. Wasn't actually taking any responsibility for all the causes that I was making.
Yeah.
And so that was the first benefit that I got from practicing, was understanding the nature of cause and effect. That if you want to change your future, look at what causes you're making right now in this moment. Buddhism is really about mastering the moment.
Yeah.
How much can you really, and I mean, that's true, I think, for a lot of disciplines. I think a lot of, whether it's boxing or certain forms of art, music, jazz especially, mastery comes down to how much can you single-mindedly devote yourself to mastering this moment, putting your whole existence into what it is that you're doing. And so I started doing my best to do that, and battling my own tendencies, trying to stop smoking and drinking every day. And it was during that time that I started reading books written by Daisaku Ikeda, the person who I consider my mentor.
Yeah.
And I think after being expelled from school, a quick anecdote about that, the vice principal in my middle school, she kind of, it was like a 3-month process leading up to the school board trial. And she befriended my family. She told me, Nathan, I really believe in you. I want you to stay in our school. I don't want you to, get lost in the system and get expelled. So I just need you to work with me. And I need you to, she would interview me and my family like multiple times. The day of the school board trial, she stood up in front of everybody and she said, it's my conclusion that Nathan is an animal who doesn't deserve to be educated with normal children. Wow. And she listed off. So the whole time she had been building a case against me to get me expelled.
Yeah.
And I think at that moment I was like, fuck adults.
Yeah.
I don't trust any of them.
Yeah.
They're all full of shit. Excuse my language. I don't know if this is a PG podcast.
It was. No, I'm kidding.
Just change the ratings. You got to change the setting on the YouTube channel. Yeah. So I really stopped trusting adults at that point. And I think, and just people in general, and I think there was something in the humanity and sincerity that I could feel in Daisaku Ikeda's writings and his belief in young people. I think that's one of his main, what he stands for is that young people are the most important factors in terms of changing the world. And I had never heard anybody say that, Maybe my parents said it, but you don't listen to what your parents say.
Right, yeah.
And to know where he came from, what he went through, he lost everything in World War II. His house was firebombed. His older brother was killed in the war. He had tuberculosis from the age of 13. He couldn't go to college. He was too poor. And from that, he chose a mentor, Jose Toda, the second president of the Soka Gakkai. He worked under him for 11 years, and Jose Toda trained him, taught him everything that he knew. Daisaku Ikeda has now earned more than 300 honorary doctorates from universities around the world, which is more than anybody in human history.
Wow.
And he never even went to college.
Yeah.
And it just showed me like he's someone that walks the walk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's about what he writes about. There's not this disconnect between what he says and what he does. And I decided at a very young age, you need a teacher in anything in life, whether you want to be better at basketball or be a good artist. Like, if you really want to do well, you need, whether it's a living or a dead teacher, you have to choose someone as an example of a master of your discipline. So in terms of mastering life and mastering Buddhism, I chose him as my mentor. And I would say that that's definitely the single most important decision I've ever made in my life, because everything I've been able to change, all the good things that have happened in my life since then, I attribute to that decision to walk the path of mentor and disciple.
Yeah.
Since then.
Damn. That it definitely makes you commit to something, right? When you do something like that, you challenge yourself. We're talking about those obstacles of hitting the wall, climbing over the wall.
For sure.
You said that the Buddhism is kind of where there's two forms. The second form that you're mentioning was not so much running away from it, but taking in onto it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like we talk about it a lot here on the show. Is, for example, electronics. Right? We know what it's doing to the kids with the cell phones and all that stuff, right? And we always talk about you can't take that stuff away, but you gotta just kind of roll with the punches, so to speak, right? In boxing, but you gotta kind of learn to adapt. You know, put some restrictions around there or whatever. I don't know, just kind of little bit of a bubble on me when you were talking about that. But I did want to ask you about Buddhism. I think there's a lot of people talk about how it's very similar to Hinduism, and you know when you look at the Buddha, the statue, right, that you see it's very similar to the Hindu. How are they so different? I mean, with Buddhism and Hinduism.
It's a great question. So Buddhism emerged from Hindu culture. So Shakyamuni Buddha, the original teacher who founded the philosophy of Buddhism, he was born into a Hindu society. So definitely he was breathing Hinduism from a young age. That was like the background noise of his life.
Yeah.
Everything around him was governed by Hindu philosophy. I'm definitely not as well versed in Hinduism as I am in Buddhism. I know in Hinduism, I've noticed that there's like, they talk a lot about different gods. There's like hundreds, thousands of gods in Hinduism.
Right.
There's definitely, I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't know that much. But what I do know is that Shakyamuni was born into a wealthy family. He was a prince, actually. He could have had the easiest life possible, and he did for like the first 19, 20 years. And his parents really sheltered him from the reality outside the palace gates. And legend has it that when he finally left the palace and really, really went in amongst the people in his city, he saw people dying in the streets. He saw beggars. He saw people with leprosy, things he had never seen before. And that really kind of opened his eyes and made him think, what do I actually know about life?
Yeah.
And so he voluntarily renounced his inheritance, left the palace, and went on a religious quest to understand life. And he studied the Vedas, Hinduism. I'm sure he studied. I bet you at that time, we don't talk about this too much, but I bet you there was influences from Greek society. There's probably so much like scholarship from other cultures. I bet you he might have learned about, because I think Socrates and that whole movement in Greece was happening around the same time or a little bit before. So, I mean, he basically studied as much as he could and tried to learn from as many teachers as possible. And his conclusion was that, basically that we all have the Buddha nature within inside of us. He taught for almost 5 decades, and basically his enlightenment that he reached of his own study, he understood that it's really difficult for ordinary people with so many responsibilities and problems to actually have the time to be able to invest that amount of time in studying religion, right? Like he had that luxury in that time. And so he spent many decades trying to educate people. This whole notion that Shakyamuni was a fat dude that sat around and meditated, it's a complete fiction.
Yeah.
And that's just because it's like the game of telephone times 2,000 years,
of course, yeah,
through 100 different countries.
It's going to change from the original.
It's going to change, exactly. Right. He was more like Gandhi or Martin Luther King. He was walking everywhere. He was walking from village to village. He was talking to thousands of people. He was an educator.
Yeah.
That's what he was. And he was not fat. If he walked that much, I mean, unless like he was just eating like a lot of, fatty foods, I don't know, but he was on the move talking to people. And he was developing his own philosophy through his dialogues with people. That sharpened his sword, so to speak, his philosophical sword. And in the last kind of decade of his life, he revealed the Lotus Sutra, in which he really taught that, until now, you all thought that I was teaching the truth, but in fact, I was just preparing you towards. It's kind of like, how do you teach trigonometry to third graders?
Yeah.
You can't. You have to develop step by step their understanding. So he spent decades developing people's capacity, and in the final decade of his life, he revealed that I didn't attain enlightenment for the first time in this lifetime. Enlightenment is internally inherent inside each of our lives. And so in a sense, he was remembering what is already within him.
Yeah.
And kind of, so that's one aspect of it. So I think if we look at, like, I think Hinduism, I'm not exactly sure, but I think the caste system in India, where depending on what caste you're born into, there's a certain lower caste that can only do really, really like basically clean sewers. That's their job.
Yeah.
If you're born into that caste, you have to clean the sewer the rest of your life.
Oh.
And you can't do anything else. And people from different castes look at you as being worse than a cow.
Yeah.
You're not even human. You're worse than an animal. And I think that may be woven into some of the philosophy of Hinduism. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
So that's, maybe we can post in the show notes. We can go back and
Go
I don't want to
like
misrepresent.
Yeah. I'm just trying to understand. I know I'm not going to understand Buddhism in 30, 40 minutes.
In one show, yeah.
But, it just seems as if it's almost like therapy, like a therapist, It's a philosophy that once you get in, you get what you want from it. Whereas most religions are like that, right? I mean, but there's a lot, and not to pick on any religions, but there's a lot of religions that tell you this is the way that you need to think. This is the way that you need to do it.
Yeah.
And this is the way.
Yeah.
But it's what a certain individual gets from that.
Absolutely.
Now, that, for example, there's a misconception again with Buddhism that I've read. None of them, drink alcohol.
I'm going to have a beer tonight when I get home.
Yeah. Again, misconceptions. No, they don't eat meat. You know what I mean? There's all these things, but it's not, again, I'm trying to rationalize what it means, Buddhism. And I don't think it's much of a religion as it is an idea.
It's like a life philosophy.
Yeah.
It's a practice and a philosophy.
And then you said, I forget his name, but the one that traveled, the prince, Shakyamuni. Like you said, he grabbed a little bit of everything and then made his own, whatever he felt was right. And I think that's what most people need to do. And Laura tells me all the time, you just got to be nice. If we're all nice to each other, then there's no reason that you need to hate someone, dislike this and that. So then you're going to, talk shit about them,
Yeah.
It's just easier if you're nice to everyone.
Yeah.
Because you get what, you're getting what you want from it.
For sure. And I think that's one of the key insights of religion in general and Buddhism in particular is it's hard to be nice to people if you yourself aren't happy.
Yeah.
So creating harmonious relationships, like whether it's in our family, in our neighborhood, in the government, between governments, between countries. I mean, we can, look at all these external factors, but ultimately most of the suffering we see in the world is people who are leading, taking the lead, have certain blind spots, certain prejudices, certain misconceptions about other people. And I think people themselves have to change within to be able to work together harmoniously, right? Like it takes a lot of effort to be nice, like to actually to genuinely, I mean, some people I think are just born with a sunny disposition and that's great, I envy them. But I think like to really be nice and to mean it, in other words, beyond just like smiling at people, but like to really care about people beyond just our immediate family, to care about what happens to your neighbor, to care about what happens to people in your community. It's like, I think that requires us to understand how deeply interconnected we actually are. That, and I truly believe this is something Jose Toda, the second president of the Soka Gakkai, used to say. In the future, science will prove the validity of Buddhism. Meaning, science is going to show that ultimately our lives are not separate from each other. Consciousness is not separate.
Yeah.
And one amazing example I heard of that is like, if you think about waves on the surface of the ocean, each wave there's never two waves that are the same, right? There's only that one wave.
Right.
But that wave is the ocean itself. How is the wave not the ocean? The wave is a manifestation of the ocean, but it's a unique manifestation that will never repeat again. So Jose Torre used to say, people are like waves on the surface of the universe. Your life is a manifestation of the entire ocean, of the entire universe. You are the universe, but you're a unique manifestation of it, your individual existence. If we develop that ability, whether it's through education, I think education plays a huge key, like to feel like, okay, if that's true, if my life is that vast, that means like, if I'm, hurting that person, I'm hurting a part of myself, right? And it's really difficult to really know that beyond theory, to really feel that. But I think unless, we're able to figure out ways, like whether it's through our educational systems or through culture or there's plenty of ways that we can do that, I think. Social media, right?
That's probably the worst part about it. There's so much ignorance out there because of it.
Yeah, and it gets, perpetuated, and one like can reach like 1 million people in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, I mean, that's kind of, I know we'll bring this to, we'll wrap up the show pretty quick right now. I know you got somewhere to go, but it kind of gets me to your next novel. Now, we won't talk too much about it because, again, it's not ready. It's not published yet. But is the title set, Rewrite These Walls?
Yeah, unless the publishing house, that whoever decides to pick it, sometimes they do say, actually, we're going to change the title. Yeah. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But for now. For now.
But I did, can we promote your video?
Sure.
We can promote your video, it's on YouTube.
Yeah. Just type "Rewrite These Walls."
Rewrite These walls.
I created a short little ghetto book trailer for the.
It's really good.
He says I paid him under the table to say that.
No, I do. I liked it. It's really good.
Thank you.
It's especially right now what we're going through. With the whole with the wall. I mean, Rewrite These Walls.
Yeah.
You guys check it out. You guys really got to look at it.
Appreciate that.
I hope it does get picked up soon. I can't wait to read your memoir. The title is Songs to Make the Desert Bear Fruit. It's not a long title.
It's a long title.
It's not a long title.
It's long. If you read it, it will make sense.
Yeah. Okay. But I can't wait. Like I said, I read the prologue, but I can't wait to read the rest of it. And I thank you for coming on.
Of course.
And any way you want to close this out right now?
No, just I really appreciate the opportunity. Whether it's a podcast or, at a coffee shop, or I think the more opportunities we can create for people to meet and talk and make connections, it's all positive. It's great. So I just appreciate the chance to be able to talk, and I hope everybody out there enjoyed listening to us.
There you go. And I appreciate you.
Of course.
All right. Well, this is Fidel. That's Nathan. Talking Again Podcast, The Tap. We're tapping out.